I came across a heartbreaking post from a 68-year-old woman named Carol, who wrote about how her daughter had adopted a golden retriever and suddenly stopped inviting her to family dinners, explaining that Buddy needs consistency and mom makes him anxious. The comments were filled with outrage. How can a dog take priority over your own mother? What kind of person chooses a pet over their parent? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What made my hands shake wasn't just the cruelty of Carol's story. It was that I was reading it while sitting in my empty apartment in Chicago, where my own family had just uninvited me from Thanksgiving dinner because their new rescue dog doesn't do well with too many people around. But here's what my daughter Sarah and son-in-law Mark didn't know when they essentially replaced their 70-year-old mother with a 4-legged furry companion. I wasn't just some lonely old woman they could discard for their convenience. I was a woman who still had her late husband's life insurance money, a valid passport, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Let me tell you how I went from being treated like an inconvenience in my own family to sipping wine at a cafe in Montmartre, watching my daughter desperately call my disconnected phone. It all started 8 months ago, on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. I had just finished preparing a special dinner to celebrate Sarah's promotion to marketing director at her firm. I'd spent the entire afternoon making her favorite chicken parmesan from scratch, the same recipe I'd been perfecting since she was 7 years old. The table was set with my good china, the Wedgwood pattern that had been my mother's, and I'd even bought a bottle of champagne to toast her success. When Sarah called at 5 p.m., I expected her to say she was running late from work. Instead, she sounded breathless with excitement. "Mom, we've decided to expand our family," she announced. For a moment, my heart soared. At 42, Sarah had been trying to have children for years. She and Mark had been through fertility treatments, consultations with specialists, and countless disappointments. I thought she was finally announcing the pregnancy we'd all been praying for. "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful. When are you due?" I asked, already mentally calculating when I'd become a grandmother. "Due? Mom, we're not having a baby. We're adopting a dog, a 3-year-old German Shepherd mix named Bruno. He's been through some trauma, so he needs a very calm, structured environment to heal." The silence on my end must have lasted longer than I realized, because Sarah continued talking, filling the space with details about Bruno's background, his behavioral issues, and the extensive training program they'd enrolled in. I felt a pang of disappointment but quickly recovered. After all, this was my daughter's life, and if adopting a dog brought her joy, I should be supportive. "That's nice, dear. I know how much you and Mark have wanted a pet. Mom, you have no idea how excited we are. Bruno is going to change everything. We're already transforming the guest room into his safe space, and we're working with a behavioral specialist to help him adjust. This is going to be such a journey." The guest room. The same room where I'd been staying during my monthly visits ever since Robert died 5 years ago. The room where I kept a few changes of clothes, my favorite books, and the framed photo of Robert and me on our 40th wedding anniversary. The room that had become my sanctuary during those long, lonely months after losing my husband. "We're installing special flooring that's easier on his joints," Sarah continued, "and we got him this amazing orthopedic bed that cost more than our mattress. The trainer says creating a dedicated space will help him feel secure." I looked around my own apartment, at the dinner growing cold on the stove, and felt something shift inside me. "Well, I can't wait to meet him," I said, though my voice sounded flat even to my own ears. "Next weekend." "Oh, Mom. There is one thing, though. The trainer said Bruno will need at least 6 weeks to settle in without any disruptions to his routine. So maybe hold off on visiting for a little while? We want to give him the best possible start." 6 weeks. I had been visiting Sarah and Mark every month for the past 5 years, ever since Robert died and left me rattling around in our family home alone. After Robert's funeral, when the house felt too big and too quiet, those monthly visits had become my lifeline. I'd help Sarah with her garden, teach her family recipes that had been passed down through generations, and we'd spend hours talking about everything and nothing while old movies played in the background. "Of course," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "I understand completely. Bruno needs to feel secure." But as I hung up the phone and looked at the elaborate dinner I'd prepared for a celebration that would never happen, I felt the first crack in what had been my unshakable faith in my daughter's love. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my routine, trying to fill the space that my monthly visits had occupied. I increased my volunteer hours at the local library, joined a new book club, and even signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community center. But every time my phone buzzed with a notification from Sarah's social media, I felt that crack grow a little wider. Her Instagram, which had previously featured occasional photos of her and Mark at restaurants or on weekend trips, suddenly became a shrine to Bruno. Professional quality photos of Bruno sleeping in patches of sunlight, slow-motion videos of Bruno learning to sit, stay, and come when called. Long emotional captions about Bruno's healing journey and how much joy he was bringing to their lives. "Look at this beautiful boy learning to trust again." Read one caption under a photo of Bruno cautiously accepting a treat from Mark's hand. "3 weeks ago, he wouldn't even let us pet him. Now he's starting to understand that he's safe here. My heart is so full watching him blossom." I stared at that post for a long time, trying to remember the last time Sarah had written anything that emotional about me, or about any human being in her life for that matter. The 6-week mark came and went without any mention of resuming visits. When I gently brought it up during one of our phone calls, Sarah sounded genuinely surprised. "Oh, Mom, I thought you understood. Bruno's doing so well, but he's still very fragile. The trainer says introducing new people too quickly could set back all his progress. Maybe in another month or two?" "Sarah, I'm not a new person. I'm your mother. I've been coming to your house regularly for 5 years." "I know. But to Bruno, you're still a stranger. And right now, his mental health has to be our priority. You understand, don't you?" I understood more than she realized. I understood that somewhere along the way, my daughter had decided that a dog's comfort was more important than her mother's feelings. But I also understood that pointing this out would only make me sound petty and jealous, so I swallowed my hurt and said, "Of course, sweetheart. Bruno's well-being comes first." As spring turned to summer, my conversations with Sarah became increasingly one-sided. She would call, ostensibly to check on me, but every topic somehow circled back to Bruno and his remarkable progress. "How's your garden coming along, Mom?" she'd ask. "Oh, the tomatoes are doing beautifully this year. I planted those heirloom varieties you like, and that's wonderful." Speaking of gardens, we've been working with Bruno on his recall in the backyard. Yesterday, he came when called from all the way across the yard. The trainer says that's a huge breakthrough for a dog with his background. "That's nice, dear." "You?" "No, Mom. I never understood before how much emotional intelligence dogs have. Bruno can sense our moods better than most people can. When I had that stressful week at work, he just knew. He stayed close to me, resting his head on my lap whenever I sat down. It was like having a furry therapist." I found myself wondering when Sarah had started speaking about this dog with more tenderness and admiration than she'd ever used when talking about me, her own mother who had sacrificed years of her life raising her, supporting her through college, and helping her navigate the challenges of adulthood. "The vet says Bruno has probably never felt truly safe before coming to us," Sarah continued. "Can you imagine living your whole life afraid, never knowing if the people around you will hurt you or help you? We're literally giving him his first experience of unconditional love." Unconditional love. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. This from the daughter who was conditioning her love for me on whether it might inconvenience her dog. By late summer, I realized I had become a background character in my own daughter's life. Our weekly phone calls had dwindled to brief check-ins where Sarah seemed distracted and eager to get off the phone. When she did engage, it was to share yet another Bruno milestone, or to ask for advice about dog training techniques she'd read about online. "Mom, I need your opinion on something," she said during one of these calls. "We're thinking about getting Bruno a companion dog. The trainer thinks it might help with his separation anxiety." "A second dog?" "A smaller one, maybe a rescue beagle. Bruno does so well with other dogs at the park, and the trainer says having a pack mentality could actually make him feel more secure." I listened as Sarah described the extensive research she'd done into dog breeds, the additional training programs they'd need to enroll in, and the modifications they were planning to make to their home to accommodate 2 dogs. "It sounds like you've thought this through very carefully," I said. "We have. Mark and I have never felt more purposeful than we do now. Taking care of Bruno, helping him heal, it's like we've found our calling. We're even thinking about fostering other dogs in the future." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You and Mark are clearly devoted parents." "Parents," Sarah repeated, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I like that. We are Bruno's parents, aren't we? It's such a different kind of love than I expected. More pure, somehow. More selfless." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the calendar where I used to mark the dates of my monthly visits to Sarah's house. The squares were empty now, had been for months. I tried to remember the last time Sarah had asked how I was doing. Really asked. The way she inquired about Bruno's emotional state multiple times per conversation. I found myself scrolling through her social media posts, looking for any mention of me, any acknowledgement that I existed in her life beyond these perfunctory phone calls. What I found instead was a carefully curated feed documenting every aspect of Bruno's life. His first successful walk without anxiety, his first time playing with other dogs, his first thunderstorm where he didn't hide under the bed. 6 months. "With our boy," read the caption on a recent post, showing Bruno sleeping peacefully on the couch. From a terrified, traumatized pup to this confident, loving family member, he's taught us so much about patience, healing, and what it means to truly put someone else's needs first. We're the lucky ones to be his humans. I stared at that post for a long time, trying to remember the last time Sarah had posted a photo of me, or written anything about the woman who had actually taught her about patience, healing, and putting someone else's needs first during the 22 years I spent raising her. The breaking point came in early October when I called to discuss Thanksgiving plans. For weeks, I'd been looking forward to this conversation, hoping that maybe the holiday would be a turning point, a chance to rebuild our relationship and create new traditions that could include Bruno. "Mom? About Thanksgiving," Sarah said, her voice taking on that careful tone I'd learned to dread. "We've decided to do something different this year." "Different how?" "Well, we're going to stay home. Just Mark and me and Bruno. Keep it low-key." I felt my stomach drop. "Just the 3 of you?" Bruno is still working through some anxiety issues, and holidays can be really overwhelming for rescue dogs. Too many new sounds, smells, people, it could trigger a major setback. "Sarah, it wouldn't be too many people. It would just be me, the same person who's been coming to your house for years." "I know, Mom, but you don't understand how fragile Bruno's progress is right now. Last week, the mailman came to the door, and Bruno hid under the bed for 3 hours. We can't risk anything that might make him feel unsafe." I sat in my kitchen, holding the phone, trying to process what I was hearing. My daughter was uninviting me from Thanksgiving, a holiday we'd celebrated together every year since she was born, because a dog might be uncomfortable. "What about Christmas?" I asked quietly. "Let's see how Bruno is doing by then. Maybe we can do a phone call or video chat." "A phone call? For Christmas? instead of the tradition we'd maintained for over 4 decades. "Sarah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "do you realize what you're saying? You're choosing a dog over your mother." "Mom, that's not fair. It's not about choosing. It's about being responsible pet parents. Bruno depends on us completely. He can't advocate for himself, and I can. You're an adult, Mom. You have other options. You can go to Mrs. Patterson's house next door, or maybe try that senior center you're always talking about. Bruno only has us. Other options." As if being shuffled off to spend the holidays with near strangers was equivalent to being welcomed into my own daughter's home. "I see," I said. "Mom, please don't be like this. You know I love you. This is just about timing. Once Bruno is more settled, things will be different." But I knew they wouldn't be different. This wasn't about Bruno's timeline for healing. This was about my daughter's priorities, and I was no longer one of them. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the Thanksgiving recipes I'd already started planning. Turkey with sage stuffing, Sarah's favorite since she was a little girl. Green bean casserole with the crispy onions on top that she used to sneak off the dish before dinner. Pumpkin pie made from scratch using Robert's mother's recipe, the one Sarah had begged me to teach her just 3 years ago. I looked around my empty house, at the photo on the mantel of Sarah and me from last Thanksgiving, both of us laughing as we tried to figure out why the gravy had gone lumpy. It felt like looking at artifacts from someone else's life, evidence of a relationship that had somehow evaporated without me noticing. That evening, I called my sister Margaret in Portland. Margaret was 2 years younger than me, had never married, and had built a successful career as a travel writer. She'd always been the adventurous one in our family, the one who chose experiences over security. "Ruth, you sound terrible," she said as soon as she heard my voice. "What's wrong?" I told her everything. The monthly visits that had stopped, the phone calls that had become Bruno updates, the Thanksgiving disinvitation. When I finished, the silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we'd lost connection. "Margaret? Are you there?" "I'm here," she said, her voice tight with anger. "I'm just trying to process the fact that my niece has turned into the kind of person who abandons her mother for a dog." "She hasn't abandoned me," I said automatically, still defending Sarah out of habit. "Ruth, listen to yourself. She's uninvited. You from Thanksgiving. She's stopped your monthly visits. She doesn't ask about your life anymore. If that's not abandonment, what is?" I didn't have an answer for that. "You know what this is?" Margaret continued. "This is Sarah playing house with a creature that can't disagree with her, can't challenge her, can't expect anything from her except food and walks. It's the perfect relationship for someone who wants to feel important without having to deal with the complexities of human emotion." "That's harsh, Margaret." "It's true. Dogs are easy, Ruth. They don't have opinions about your life choices. They don't ask uncomfortable questions. They don't challenge you to be a better person. They just worship you for existing. Sarah has chosen the easy option." After we hung up, I sat in my living room looking at the photo albums spread across my coffee table. 42 years of Sarah's life documented in pictures. Birthday parties where I'd stayed up all night baking elaborate cakes, Halloween costumes I'd sewn by hand, school plays where I'd sat in the front row cheering, graduation ceremonies where I'd cried with pride. I thought about all the times I'd put Sarah's needs first, all the sacrifices I'd made gladly because that's what mothers do. I thought about the years after Robert died when Sarah had been my anchor, my reason to keep going, my greatest source of joy. And now I was being replaced by an animal who couldn't even say my name. That's when I realized something that chilled me to the bone. I had become expendable in my own daughter's life, replaced by a creature that couldn't even hold a conversation. But what Sarah didn't understand was that she was about to learn the difference between someone who needs you and someone who chooses to be in your life. And I was about to make a choice that would change everything. I opened my laptop and, for the first time in years, began researching something just for me. Not for Sarah's benefit, not to fill time between visits, but for my own future. I typed 4 words into the search bar: retirement communities in France. The first article that came up was titled, "Living Your Best Life in Paris, a Guide for American Retirees." I clicked on it and began to read about a world where I could walk to cafes instead of driving to strip malls, where I could spend afternoons in museums instead of waiting by the phone for calls that never came, where I could build a life based on my own interests instead of accommodating a dog's anxiety schedule. For the first time in months, I felt something that had been missing from my life: excitement about the future. Sarah thought she had trained me to accept whatever scraps of attention she was willing to throw my way, just like she'd trained Bruno to be grateful for basic kindness. She was about to learn that, unlike her dog, I had options, and I was about to use them. The morning after my conversation with Margaret, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. For months, I had been making excuses for Sarah's behavior, convincing myself that her obsession with Bruno was just a phase, that eventually things would return to normal. But lying in bed that October morning, staring at the ceiling of my empty bedroom, I realized I had been willfully blind to signs that had been accumulating for months. I got up and made myself coffee, Robert's old morning ritual that I'd maintained religiously since his death, and sat down at my kitchen table with a notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Signs I've been ignoring," and began to document the slow erosion of my relationship with my daughter. The first entry was easy. Guest room converted to dog space without discussion. Sarah hadn't asked if I minded giving up my regular accommodation. She hadn't offered alternatives or even acknowledged that this change affected me. She had simply announced it as a fait accompli, expecting me to accept whatever new arrangement she deemed appropriate. The second entry made my stomach clench. Monthly visits stopped indefinitely. What had been presented as a temporary adjustment for Bruno's settling-in period had quietly become the new normal. When I'd brought up resuming visits, Sarah had looked at me as if I were being unreasonable, as if expecting to maintain our 5-year tradition was somehow selfish. I continued writing, and with each entry, the pattern became clearer. Phone, calls shortened and redirected to Bruno updates. Holiday plans canceled without consultation. Social media posts exclusively about dog, 0 mentions of family. Emergency contact never called when I was in hospital for food poisoning. That last one stopped me cold. I had completely forgotten about the incident in August when I'd spent a night in the emergency room with severe dehydration from food poisoning. The nurse had asked for my emergency contact, and I'd given them Sarah's number out of habit. They'd called 3 times over 8 hours and never reached her. When I mentioned it during our next phone conversation, Sarah's response had been dismissive. "Oh, Mom, we were at a dog training workshop all day. It was really intensive. They make you turn off your phone so you can focus on the techniques. Is everything okay now?" She hadn't asked what had happened, hadn't shown concern about me being alone in the hospital, hadn't even apologized for being unreachable. She'd moved immediately to describing what Bruno had learned at the workshop. I set down my pen and stared at the list I'd compiled. 12 concrete examples of how I had been systematically deprioritized in my daughter's life. What made it worse was realizing how I had enabled this process by making excuses for each individual incident instead of seeing the pattern. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Sarah, which was unusual. She typically called on Sunday evenings, and it was only Thursday morning. "Hi, Mom," she said, and I could hear the forced cheerfulness in her voice. "I wanted to call and explain about Thanksgiving. I'm worried. You might have gotten the wrong impression yesterday." "What impression would that be?" "That we don't want you here for the holidays." "That's not it at all. It's just that Bruno's therapist, yes, we found him an animal behavioral therapist, says that holidays are particularly triggering for dogs with trauma histories. The change in routine, the different smells from cooking, Even things like decorative centerpieces can cause anxiety spikes. Sarah, I've been cooking Thanksgiving dinner in your house for the past 5 years. Bruno wasn't triggered by the smell of turkey then because he wasn't there. But somehow my presence is now a threat to his mental health? Mom, you're not listening. It's not about you specifically. It's about any disruption to his routine. We've worked so hard to establish patterns that make him feel secure. And where do I fit into these patterns? There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. Well, we're still figuring that out. The therapist says we need to prioritize stability for at least the first year. The first year, Sarah? You're talking about excluding me from family gatherings for an entire year. Not excluding, just postponing. Look, Mom, I know this is hard for you to understand, but Bruno isn't just a pet to us. He's family. And when you bring a new family member into your home, especially one who's been traumatized, you have to make adjustments. I am family too, Sarah. I'm your mother. Of course you are. But Mom, you're self-sufficient. You have your own life, your own friends. Bruno only has us. He's completely dependent on us for everything. His physical health, his emotional well-being, his sense of safety in the world. I felt something cold settle in my chest. So, because I'm self-sufficient, my needs matter less than his. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? Another pause. I'm saying that right now, Bruno needs us more than you do. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, trying to process what I'd just heard. My daughter had explicitly told me that a dog's needs took priority over mine because the dog was more helpless. The implication was clear. Independence and self-sufficiency had made me less worthy of care and consideration, not more deserving of respect. I thought about Robert, who had always said that the measure of a person's character was how they treated those who couldn't do anything for them in return. But Sarah seemed to have inverted this principle. She was measuring worthiness by helplessness, giving more love and attention to whoever needed her most desperately. It was a recipe for creating and maintaining unhealthy dependencies, and I was suddenly grateful that Robert wasn't alive to see what our daughter had become. That weekend, I decided to test my hypothesis. I called Sarah on Saturday afternoon, timing it for when I knew she'd typically be doing weekend errands. "Hi, sweetheart," I said when she answered. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Oh, hi, Mom. Actually, we're at the pet store picking out a new harness for Bruno. The trainer recommended one that distributes pressure more evenly across his chest. What's up?" "I wanted to let you know that I've been having some dizzy spells lately. Nothing serious, I don't think, but it's been concerning me." She said, clearly distracted. "Have you seen a doctor?" "I have an appointment next week. I was just wondering if you could drive me, since they might need to dilate my eyes or run tests that would make driving unsafe." "Oh, Mom, next week is really busy for us. We have Bruno's behavioral therapy session on Tuesday, a consultation with a new vet on Wednesday, and then Thursday is his first group socialization class. Could you maybe ask Mrs. Patterson to drive you?" Mrs. Patterson, my 78-year-old neighbor who had cataracts and hadn't driven at night in 2 years. "Of course," I said. I wouldn't want to interfere with Bruno's schedule. "Thanks for understanding, Mom. I know you're independent enough to figure it out." "Oh, I have to go. Bruno found a toy he likes and we want to get it before he changes his mind. You know how particular he can be." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding my dead phone, marveling at what had just happened. I had essentially told my daughter that I was having concerning health symptoms and needed help getting to a medical appointment, and her response had been to shuffle me off to an elderly neighbor so she could maintain her dog's therapy schedule. Darrow. Worst part was that she had framed my self-sufficiency as a reason why I should expect less support, not more consideration. I called Margaret immediately. "She said what?" Margaret's voice was sharp with disbelief. "She said I was independent enough to figure it out myself, in the context of me having concerning health symptoms." Ruth, you realize what this is, don't you? She's trained herself to see you as the low-maintenance option. You don't whine when you're uncomfortable. You don't demand constant attention. You don't require her to rearrange her schedule. So you've become the family member she can safely ignore. That's a terrible way to put it. It's an accurate way to put it. Sarah has learned that there are no consequences for treating you poorly because you'll always forgive her, always make excuses for her, always accommodate her choices. Meanwhile, Bruno gets her full attention because he'll literally destroy her house if his needs aren't met. I knew Margaret was right, but hearing it said so bluntly was painful. You know what you need to do, Margaret continued. You need to create consequences. Not punishment, not revenge. Consequences. Natural results that show Sarah what her choices actually cost. What do you mean? I mean, stop being the low-maintenance option. Stop making her life easier. Stop being available whenever she decides she has time for you. That Sunday, Sarah called for our usual weekly check-in. I let it go to voicemail. She called again an hour later, and again I didn't answer. When she texted asking if everything was okay, I waited 4 hours before responding with a simple, "Fine, just busy." She called Monday evening, which was unusual. Our calls were typically on Sundays. "Mom, I was worried when you didn't answer yesterday. Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine, Sarah. I was just occupied with other things." "What other things?" "I've been researching some travel options. I'm thinking about taking a trip." "Oh, that's nice. Where are you thinking of going?" "Europe, possibly. Maybe France." There was a pause. "France? Mom, that's a big trip. Are you sure you're up for international travel at your age?" "At my age." As if 70 was ancient. As if I was too decrepit to navigate airports in foreign cities. "I'm the same age now as I was 3 months ago when you had no problem with me driving 6 hours to help you install new shelving in your garage, Sarah." "That's different. That was just driving, not dealing with foreign languages and currency and—" "Sarah, I speak French. I took 4 years in high school and 2 years in college. I've been reading French novels for pleasure for decades." I didn't know that. Of course she didn't. When was the last time Sarah had asked me about my interests, my capabilities, my inner life? When had she ever inquired about what I did with my time beyond our monthly visits to her house? "There's a lot you don't know about me," I said quietly. "What do you mean?" "I mean that for the past few years, our relationship has been entirely focused on your life, your needs, your schedule. You know nothing about my book club, my volunteer work, my friendships, my interests, or my plans because you've never asked." "Mom, that's not fair. I ask how you are every time we talk." "You ask if I'm okay, Sarah. That's not the same as asking how I am. You want confirmation that I'm fine and self-sufficient so you can focus on more pressing matters, like Bruno's socialization classes." The silence stretched between us. "I don't know what you want me to say," Sarah finally said. "I don't want you to say anything. I want you to think about whether you actually know who I am beyond being your mother. And I want you to consider whether you'd treat a friend the way you've been treating me." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began researching in earnest. Not just retirement communities in France, but short-term rental options, language immersion programs, cultural activities for seniors. I found websites dedicated to helping American retirees navigate French bureaucracy, forums where expats shared advice about everything from opening bank accounts to finding English-speaking doctors. What I discovered was an entire world of people who had decided, at various stages of their lives, that they deserved better than settling for whatever scraps of happiness were offered to them. Retirees who had moved to small French villages and learned to make cheese. Widows who had enrolled in art classes in Provence and discovered talents they never knew they had. People who had decided that the second half of their lives would be lived on their own terms. I bookmarked dozens of articles, saved contact information for relocation specialists, and began making notes about visa requirements and healthcare options. For the first time in months, I felt energized by possibility instead of diminished by disappointment. On Wednesday, I made an appointment with my doctor for a routine checkup, not because I was having dizzy spells, which had been a test, but because I wanted to ensure I was healthy enough for major life changes. Dr. Harrison, who had been my physician for 15 years, was surprised by my questions about international travel and medical care abroad. "Ruth, this is quite a departure from your usual routine. What's brought this on?" I found myself telling him about Sarah, about Bruno, about the gradual realization that I had become peripheral in my own daughter's life. "It sounds like you're at a crossroads," he said thoughtfully. "But Ruth, these are major decisions. Have you considered family counseling? Sometimes relationship dynamics can be changed without such drastic steps." "Dr. Harrison, I spent 45 years of my life prioritizing other people's needs over my own. First Robert's business ventures, then Sarah's childhood and education, then Robert's illness, then supporting Sarah through her career struggles and fertility issues. I'm 70 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I have the freedom to make choices based purely on what would make me happy. And moving to France would make you happy? The idea of it makes me feel more alive than I've felt in years." He ran through a comprehensive physical exam and declared me to be in excellent health for international travel. As I was leaving, he handed me a referral to a therapist who specialized in major life transitions. "Not because I think you're making a mistake," he said, "but because big changes are easier when you have professional support to process them." I made the appointment for the following week. Thursday evening, Sarah called again. This time, her tone was different, less distracted, more focused. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation on Monday. You sounded upset, and I want to understand what's going on." "What's going on is that I've realized our relationship has become completely one-sided." "How so?" "Sarah, when was the last time you asked about my life without immediately redirecting the conversation to Bruno? I ask about your life all the time. You ask if I'm okay. You ask if I need anything. You don't ask what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about, what I'm excited about, what I'm worried about. You don't ask about my friendships or my volunteer work or my hobbies. You treat me like a maintenance issue to be checked off your list, not like a person with an interior life. That's not true." "Sarah, what book am I currently reading?" Silence. "What volunteer work do I do at the library?" More silence. "Who did I have lunch with last week?" "Mom, you don't know any of this because you've never asked. But I can tell you that Bruno had a breakthrough with his separation anxiety on Tuesday, that he's learned to play with rope toys without destroying them, and that his new vet thinks his joint health is excellent for his age. Those are important things happening in our family. Bruno is not my family, Sarah. You are my family. Or you were. What do you mean I was? I mean that family members show interest in each other's lives. They make time for each other. They prioritize each other's well-being. You do all of those things for Bruno, but you haven't done any of them for me in months. Mom, you're being unfair. Bruno needs constant attention because he's traumatized, I know. You've explained that many times. But Sarah, I'm not asking for constant attention. I'm asking for basic consideration. I'm asking to be included in holiday plans. I'm asking for phone calls where you actually listen to my answers. I'm asking to matter in your life as much as your dog does. You do matter. Then prove it. How? Invite me to Thanksgiving. The pause that followed was so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Mom, we've been through this. Bruno's therapist says, Sarah, stop. Just stop. Do you hear yourself? You're prioritizing a dog's theoretical discomfort over your mother's actual hurt feelings. You're choosing an animal's therapy schedule over maintaining a relationship with the woman who gave birth to you. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You're making a choice, and you're choosing Bruno over me. I need you to be honest about that instead of hiding behind his supposed therapeutic needs." "Fine," Sarah said, her voice suddenly cold. "You want honesty?" Bruno brings joy into our lives without demanding anything complicated in return. He doesn't guilt us when we're busy. He doesn't criticize our choices. He doesn't make us feel bad about how we spend our time or energy. He's just grateful to be included. There it was. The truth I'd been circling around for months. Sarah preferred Bruno because he was easier to love. He required care, but not emotional complexity. Attention, but not genuine intimacy. "I see," I said quietly. "Mom, I didn't mean—" "No, Sarah, you meant exactly what you said. Bruno is easier than I am because he can't challenge you, can't disagree with you, can't expect you to grow or change or consider perspectives other than your own." "That's not what I said." "It's what you meant. And you know what? You're right. Bruno will never ask you to examine your priorities or question your choices. He'll never point out when you're being selfish or thoughtless. He'll never expect you to take responsibility for hurting him because he can't even articulate when he's been hurt." "Mom, I'm going to let you go now, Sarah. I have some thinking to do." I hung up before she could respond. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying the conversation, hearing Sarah's words echo in my mind. Bruno brings joy into our lives without demanding anything complicated in return. Was that what I had become in my daughter's eyes? Complicated? Demanding? Was my desire for genuine connection and mutual consideration too much to ask from my own child? At 3 a.m., I got up and made myself tea, then sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. I opened a new document and began typing. "Dear Sarah, by the time you read this letter, I will be living in France. I've decided that if I'm going to be alone, I might as well be alone somewhere beautiful, somewhere I can build a life based on my own interests and desires, rather than waiting for scraps of attention from people who see me as an obligation rather than a gift. You were right when you said that Bruno is easier than I am. Dogs don't expect their caretakers to grow emotionally or examine their choices. They don't require genuine intimacy or mutual consideration. They're satisfied with basic care and occasional affection. But I am not a dog, Sarah. I am a human being, with complex needs, deep feelings, and legitimate expectations for how I should be treated by people who claim to love me. I am your mother, and I deserve better than being treated as the low-maintenance option in your life. I hope someday you'll understand that real love isn't about finding relationships that are easy and uncomplicated. It's about choosing to show up for people even when it's inconvenient, even when they challenge you, even when meeting their needs requires you to examine your own priorities. I love you, but I will not continue to accept being loved as an afterthought. Ruth. I read the letter 3 times, then saved it to my desktop. I wasn't ready to send it yet, but writing it had crystallized something important. I was done being the low-maintenance option in my own daughter's life. The next morning, I called a travel agent. I'd like to plan an extended stay in France, I told her. Possibly permanent. How exciting, she said. When were you thinking of traveling? I looked at the calendar on my wall, at all the empty squares where I used to mark visits to Sarah's house at the approaching Thanksgiving that I'd been excluded from. As soon as possible, I said. I have nothing keeping me here. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, the excitement of having something to look forward to, something that was entirely mine, that no one could take away from me or deprioritize in favor of a dog's therapy schedule. For the first time since Robert died, I was going to put myself first, and I couldn't wait to see how that felt. The travel agent, a cheerful woman named Linda who specialized in senior travel, called me back 3 days later with options that made my heart race with possibility. Mrs. Fletcher, I've found several wonderful opportunities for extended stays in France, she said, her voice bright with enthusiasm. There's a particularly lovely apartment rental program in the 7th arrondissement of Paris. That's near the Eiffel Tower and the Seine. They cater specifically to American retirees and include cultural immersion programs, French language conversation, groups and guided tours of museums and historical sites. I sat in my kitchen, notepad ready, feeling more energized than I had in months. Tell me more about that one. The apartments are fully furnished with modern amenities but classic Parisian charm. High ceilings, large windows, some with small balconies overlooking tree-lined streets. The program includes weekly housekeeping, concierge services for things like grocery delivery and appointment scheduling, and there's an on-site coordinator who helps American residents navigate everything from banking to healthcare. What about the duration? I'm thinking of a potentially permanent arrangement. They offer everything from month-to-month rentals to yearly leases, with the option to purchase if you decide to stay permanently. Many of their clients start with a 6-month trial period to see how they adjust to life abroad. As Linda described the details, the nearby farmers markets, the neighborhood cafe culture, the proximity to art galleries and theaters, I found myself taking notes frantically, as if I were planning for the most important exam of my life. There's also a community aspect, she continued. Many American expats in that area have formed informal networks, book clubs, walking groups, cooking classes where they learn to make traditional French dishes. It's designed to help people build genuine social connections, not just tourist experiences. After we hung up, I sat staring at my notes, trying to process the magnitude of what I was considering. At 70, I was contemplating moving to a foreign country, leaving behind everything familiar, starting a completely new life. It should have felt terrifying. Instead, it felt liberating. That evening, Sarah called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice careful and uncertain. "How are you doing?" "I'm well, thank you. How's Bruno?" There was a pause. "He's fine. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation last week. I think maybe we should talk." "I'm listening. Could you come over this weekend? Mark's going to be out of town visiting his parents, and I thought maybe we could have some time to really discuss things." The invitation surprised me. It was the first time in months that Sarah had suggested we spend time together, and the first time ever that she'd offered to have that time without Mark present. "What about Bruno? Won't my presence disrupt his routine?" "I think Bruno can handle it for an afternoon." I agreed to come over Saturday, though I wasn't sure what to expect from the conversation. Saturday morning, I drove to Sarah's house with a mixture of anticipation and wariness. I hadn't been there since my awkward surprise visit months earlier, and as I pulled into the driveway, I was struck again by how perfect everything looked. The lawn was immaculate, the garden beds carefully maintained, the house itself looking like something from a home design magazine. Sarah met me at the door, and I was surprised to see that she looked tired, almost worn down. Her usual polished appearance was slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Hi, Mom," she said, giving me a hug that felt more genuine than our interactions had been in months. "Come in." Bruno appeared immediately, a large, beautiful dog with intelligent brown eyes and a cautious demeanor. He sniffed in my direction but kept his distance, watching me with what looked like mild curiosity rather than the anxiety Sarah had described. "He seems very calm," I observed. "He's been doing much better lately," Sarah admitted. "The training has really helped." We settled in her living room with coffee, and for a few minutes we made small talk about my drive over and the weather, but I could sense Sarah working up to something more substantial. "Mom," she finally said, "I owe you an apology." I waited. "I've been thinking about what you said, about me not knowing what's going on in your life. So I want to ask, what book are you reading right now?" The question caught me off guard. Not because she'd asked, but because she'd remembered that I'd challenged her on it. I'm reading The Elegance of the Hedgehog by Muriel Barbery. It's about a concierge in a Parisian apartment building who hides her intelligence and education from the wealthy residents because she doesn't want to threaten their assumptions about class and worth. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. That sounds like something you'd enjoy. You always liked books with social commentary. I do. I'm also reading a travel memoir about an American woman who moved to France in her 60s and learned to paint. Is that why you mentioned wanting to travel to France? Here it was, the opening I'd been both hoping for and dreading. Partly. Sarah, I've been doing a lot of thinking since our conversation about Thanksgiving. I've been thinking too. Mom, I realize I haven't been as attentive as I should have been. It's more than that, Sarah. I've realized that I've become invisible in your life. That's not true. When was the last time you asked about my volunteer work at the library? She was quiet for a moment. I don't remember. I've been helping. Elderly people learn to use computers and navigate online resources. Last month, I helped a 85-year-old man set up video calls with his grandchildren in Seattle. He cried when he saw their faces on the screen for the first time. Sarah's expression softened. That's beautiful, Mom. I should have asked about that. I also joined a French conversation group at the community college. We meet twice a week. And I've made some lovely friends. One of them, Marie, is originally from Lyon. She's been teaching me about French culture and customs. I didn't know you were learning French. I'm refreshing it, actually. I was quite fluent in college, but I've let it get rusty over the years. We sat in silence for a moment, and I could see Sarah processing this information. Evidence of a full, rich life that she knew nothing about. Mom, I'm sorry. I should have been more interested in your life. I guess I just assumed... Assumed what? That your life was smaller, less complicated. I thought you were mostly just waiting for our visits and phone calls. There it was, the uncomfortable truth that had been lurking beneath all our interactions. Sarah had assumed that because I was older, because I was widowed, because I lived alone, my life was somehow less significant, less worthy of attention and interest. Sarah, my life isn't smaller than yours. It's different. I may not have a demanding career or a house full of responsibilities, but I have interests, friendships, goals, dreams. I have an inner life that's just as complex as anyone else's. I know that. I should have known that. Bruno had wandered over during our conversation and was now lying at Sarah's feet, occasionally looking up at her with what appeared to be concern. Even he seemed to sense the tension in the room. Sarah, can I ask you something honestly? Of course. Why is it easier for you to be attentive to Bruno's emotional needs than to mine? She was quiet for a long time, absently stroking Bruno's head while she considered the question. I think, she said slowly, because Bruno's needs are simpler. When he's anxious, I know exactly what to do. Create a calm environment, stick to his routine, give him space. When he's happy, it's obvious. He wags his tail, he plays with his toys. His emotions are straightforward. And mine aren't? Yours are more complicated. When you're hurt, you don't always say so directly. You're polite about it, you make excuses for other people's behavior. Sometimes I don't even realize I've hurt your feelings until much later. I felt a flash of anger. So, because I don't throw tantrums or destroy furniture when I'm upset, my feelings matter less? No, that's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? Sarah was quiet again, looking down at Bruno, who had rolled over to expose his belly for scratching. I mean that Bruno makes me feel successful, she said finally. Every small improvement in his behavior feels like a victory. When he learned to trust us, when he stopped hiding when strangers came to the door, when he started playing with toys, each of those things made me feel like I was making a real difference in someone's life. And I don't make you feel that way? You don't need me the way Bruno does. You're independent, capable. You handle your own problems, make your own decisions. Sometimes I wonder what I even contribute to your life. The irony was breathtaking. My independence, the trait that should have made me a source of pride for any parent, had instead made me seem less deserving of attention and care. Sarah, do you know what you contribute to my life? She shook her head. You're my daughter. You're the person I love most in the world. Your happiness matters to me more than my own. When you succeed, I feel proud. When you struggle, I worry. When you call, it's the best part of my day. When you don't call, I miss you. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know you missed me. How could you not know that? You're my child. But you never seem lonely when we talk. You always sound like you're doing fine. Because I am doing fine. But doing fine and not missing you are two different things. Sarah, I can be competent and independent and still want to be close to my daughter. I can manage my own life and still value our relationship above everything else. Bruno had gotten up and moved to a sunny spot by the window, where he curled, up for a nap. Even the dog seemed to understand that this conversation didn't require his emotional support. Mom, I think I've been seeing independence as a reason to pay less attention to you, not more. That's exactly what you've been doing. And it's backwards. People who are independent and self-sufficient aren't asking for less. They're giving you the gift of choosing to share their lives with you without needing to. Sarah wiped her eyes. I never thought of it that way. Bruno needs you because he literally cannot survive without human care. I want to be close to you because I love you and I choose to prioritize our relationship. There's a difference between need and love, Sarah. I think I confused the two. I think you did too. We sat quietly for a while, both processing the conversation. I could see Sarah thinking, really thinking, about what I'd said. Mom, about Thanksgiving, she said finally. What about it? I want you to come. We'll figure out how to make it work with Bruno. Are you sure? I don't want to disrupt his progress. Bruno's progress doesn't matter more than our relationship. I've been prioritizing the wrong things. I felt a flutter of hope, but I was also wary. Sarah, this isn't just about Thanksgiving. This is about a pattern of behavior that's been going on for months. I know, and I want to change that pattern. How? I want to start by learning about your life. Really learning. Tell me about the people in your French conversation group. Tell me about the computer classes you're teaching. Tell me about the books you're reading and what you think about them. So I did. For the next 2 hours, I told Sarah about Marie from Lyon, who had become one of my closest friends, about the 85-year-old man who'd cried when he video chatted with his grandchildren, about the watercolor painting class I'd joined, and the landscape I was working on. I told her about the loneliness I'd felt after her father died, about the ways I'd built a new life for myself, about the dreams I still had for the future. Sarah listened, really listened, asking questions, showing genuine interest, responding, with empathy and engagement. It felt like talking to the daughter I remembered from years ago, before Bruno had consumed her attention and energy. Mom, she said as we were finishing our second cup of coffee, I had no idea your life was so rich. I feel like I've been treating you like you were just sitting around waiting for me to have time for you. That's exactly how you've been treating me. I'm ashamed of that. Don't be ashamed. Be different. I want to be. But Mom, I need to ask you something. You mentioned travel to France, and earlier you talked about it like it might be more than just a vacation. Are you thinking of moving there? Here was the moment of truth. I could soften it, make it less threatening, give her an easy way to dismiss it as a passing fancy. Or I could be honest about how serious I was about creating a new life. I'm considering it, I said, because of how I've been treating you. Because I'm 70 years old and I want to spend whatever time I have left living, fully, not waiting for scraps of attention from people who see me as an obligation. Sarah flinched. Is that really how you see our relationship? It's how our relationship has become, yes. But if I change, if we fix this, would you stay? I looked around her beautiful living room, at the perfect house she'd created, at Bruno, sleeping peacefully in his patch of sunlight. This could be my life: monthly visits, weekly phone calls, being the low-maintenance family member who fit around everyone else's priorities. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. If Bruno developed a serious health problem that required constant care and attention, would you still have time and energy for rebuilding our relationship? She was quiet for a long time. I don't know, she said finally. That's an honest answer. And it tells me that your commitment to changing our dynamic is conditional on nothing more pressing coming up in your life. That's not fair. It's realistic. Sarah, you're at a stage of life where you have a lot of competing priorities. Your career, your marriage, Bruno's needs, possibly children in the future. I understand that. But I'm at a stage of life where I can choose my priorities, and I want to choose things that choose me back. I choose you, Mom. You choose me when it's convenient. When Bruno doesn't need a vet visit, when Mark doesn't have other plans, when your work schedule allows it. You fit me in around other things instead of making me a priority. Sarah was crying now, but they seemed to be tears of understanding rather than just hurt. What would it take for you to stay? She asked. I don't know if anything would, Sarah. I've spent my whole adult life accommodating other people's priorities. First your father's business ventures and health problems, then your childhood and education and early career struggles. I've been the flexible one, the understanding one, the one who adjusts her expectations to match what other people are willing to give. And now you don't want to do that anymore. I'm 70 years old. If I don't start living for myself now, when will I? We sat in silence, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted between us. This wasn't just about Bruno or Thanksgiving or phone calls. This was about me claiming the right to be treated as a priority in my own daughter's life. And Sarah realizing that she might lose me if she couldn't give me that. Mom, if you move to France, what happens to us? I don't know. Maybe we have a different relationship. One where you visit me instead of me always coming here. Maybe we video chat and send letters and you come to see me a couple times a year. That sounds so distant. It doesn't have to be distant, Sarah. It can be intentional. Quality over quantity. But I'll miss you. You miss me now. But you've learned to live with that feeling because I'm always available when you finally have time for me. Maybe missing me when I'm not available will help you appreciate me more when I am. Bruno woke up from his nap and wandered over to us, perhaps sensing that the emotional energy in the room had shifted. He approached me cautiously and, to my surprise, rested his chin on my knee. He likes you, Sarah said, surprised. I like him too. He's a beautiful dog, and I can see why you love him. Mom, I'm sorry I made you feel like you were competing with a dog for my attention. You did make me feel that way. And the worst part was that the dog was winning. Sarah laughed despite her tears. That's awful. It was awful. But it was also clarifying. It helped me understand that I deserve better than competing for scraps of attention from my own daughter. As I got ready to leave that afternoon, Sarah hugged me tightly. Mom, whatever you decide about France, I want you to know that I love you and I'm going to do better. Whether you're here or there, I want to be a daughter you can be proud of. I'm already proud of you, Sarah. I just want to be a priority in your life, not an afterthought. You will be, I promise. As I drove home, I felt a mixture of hope and sadness. Hope that maybe Sarah really would change, that maybe our relationship could be repaired. Sadness that it had taken the threat of me moving to another continent for her to really see how she'd been treating me. But I also felt something else. Certainty. Regardless of what Sarah did or didn't do going forward, I was going to start living my life on my own terms. Whether that meant moving to France or not, I was done being the low-maintenance option in anyone's life. I was going to choose things that chose me back, and if that meant sipping wine in a Parisian cafe while my daughter called my disconnected phone, desperate to reconnect with the mother she'd taken for granted, then so be it. I deserved better than waiting around for love that came with conditions and competed with dogs for priority. I deserved to be chosen first, not settled for last, and, for the first time in my adult life, I was going to insist on exactly that. The week following my conversation with Sarah felt like living in two different realities simultaneously. On the surface, things seemed to be improving between us. She called twice that week, not on her usual Sunday schedule, but spontaneously, genuinely asking about my day and listening to my answers. She remembered to ask about my French conversation group and even looked up the book I was reading to discuss it with me. But underneath this promising development, I continued my preparations for France with a sense of urgency I couldn't quite explain. It was as if some part of me knew that Sarah's newfound attention might not last, that old patterns have a way of reasserting themselves when the immediate crisis passes. I met with Linda, the travel agent, again on Tuesday to discuss specific dates and logistics. She spread brochures and rental agreements across her desk like we were planning the most natural thing in the world. A 70-year-old woman relocating to Paris. I've spoken with Madame Dubois, who manages the apartment program, Linda said, pointing to photos of a charming building with blue shutters and flower boxes. She has a lovely one-bedroom available starting December 1st. It's on the 3rd floor, there's an elevator, with a small balcony that overlooks a quiet courtyard. The previous tenant was an American writer who lived there for 3 years, before moving back to the States to be closer to her grandchildren. The irony wasn't lost on me. What happened? Did her family finally start appreciating her? Linda smiled. Actually, I think it was the opposite. She said living independently in Paris for 3 years showed her children what they were missing. They started making real effort to include her in their lives, not just manage her from a distance. I studied the photographs of the apartment. Tall, windows with gauzy curtains, built-in bookshelves, a small kitchen with modern appliances nestled into classic French architecture. It looked like a place where someone could build a real life, not just exist. What about the timeline for making a decision? Madame Dubois is holding the apartment for you until November 15th. That gives you 2 weeks to finalize your decision. If you commit, she'll need first month's rent plus a security deposit, and we can arrange for a pickup at Charles de Gaulle Airport. As I walked out of Linda's office with a folder full of documents, I felt the familiar mixture of excitement and terror that comes with standing at the edge of major life change. But for the first time, the excitement was stronger than the fear. That evening, Sarah called right as I was looking through French language books at the local bookstore. "Hi, Mom. How was your day?" "Productive," I said, flipping through a guide to Parisian neighborhoods. I met with the travel agent again about France. There was a pause. "You're still seriously considering that?" "I'm beyond considering it, Sarah. I'm planning it. But our conversation on Saturday, I thought we were working things out." I set down the book and focused on the call. We had a good conversation. You listened to me, you acknowledged some problems in our relationship, and you made some promises about doing better, and I meant those promises. I believe you did. In that moment, you absolutely meant them. But Sarah, it's been 3 days since we talked, and I can already hear your attention starting to drift. That's not true. You called yesterday to tell me about Bruno's breakthrough with the mailman. You spent 15 minutes describing how he didn't hide when packages were delivered. Then you spent 3 minutes asking about my day before cutting the conversation short because it was time for his evening walk. Mom. And today, when I mentioned meeting with the travel agent, Your first response wasn't curiosity about my plans or excitement about my potential adventure. It was concern that I might still leave despite your promises to change. Silence on the other end. Sarah, do you see the pattern? Even when you're trying to be more attentive, Bruno's needs still take priority over understanding my life. That's not fair. Bruno needed to go out. And I needed to feel like my daughter was genuinely interested in my hopes and dreams. But Bruno's bathroom schedule was more urgent than my emotional needs. I could hear her sighing, and when she spoke again, her voice had taken on a defensive edge I recognized from our childhood arguments. Mom, I can't win with you. When I don't call enough, you're upset. When I do call, but don't handle it exactly. Right, you're still upset. It's like you're looking for reasons to justify moving away. And there it was. The first sign that Sarah's commitment to change was already wavering under pressure. Instead of acknowledging the validity of my observations, she was repositioning herself as the victim of my unreasonable expectations. Sarah, I'm not looking for reasons to justify anything. I'm paying attention to whether your behavior actually matches your promises. And so far, it doesn't. That's not true. Yesterday, you cut our conversation short for Bruno's walk. Today, you're more concerned about defending yourself than understanding why I'm still making plans to leave. How is that different from the pattern we've been in for months? Because I'm trying. Trying isn't the same as succeeding. And more importantly, the fact that being genuinely attentive to me requires such tremendous effort on your part tells me everything I need to know about your actual priorities. The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with Sarah saying she needed to go because Bruno was showing signs of anxiety from hearing raised voices. Even in the middle of an argument about her priorities, she chose to end our conversation, to tend to her dog's emotional needs. After we hung up, I sat in the bookstore cafe and ordered a cappuccino, trying to process what had just happened. In less than a week, we had gone from Sarah's promises to change to her making excuses for why change was difficult to her positioning me as the unreasonable one for expecting follow-through. It was exactly the pattern Margaret had predicted. When the immediate crisis passed, old habits would reassert themselves. I called Margaret that night. Ruth, I'm sorry to say this, but I'm not surprised, she said after I described the conversation. Sarah made those promises because she was scared of losing you, but now that she thinks she's talked you out of leaving, she's reverting to default behavior. But she seemed so sincere on Saturday. She was sincere. In that moment, faced with the possibility of you moving to France, she genuinely wanted to change. But wanting to change and being capable of sustained change are two different things. So, you think she'll never really prioritize our relationship? I think Sarah is comfortable with the dynamic where she gives you just enough attention to keep you available, but not enough to actually meet your emotional needs. And I think she'll keep reverting to that comfort zone unless there are real consequences for doing so. What kind of consequences? The consequence of actually losing you. Margaret's words echoed in my mind as I made my final decision. The next morning, I called Linda and told her I wanted to commit to the Paris apartment. Wonderful, she said. Madame Dubois will be thrilled. When would you like to arrive? December 1st, as we discussed. Perfect. I'll start the paperwork immediately. Ruth, I have to say I admire your courage. It takes real strength to reinvent your life at 70. I'm not reinventing my life, Linda. I'm finally starting to live it. That afternoon, I began the practical preparations for my move. I contacted my bank about international transfers and called my insurance company about coverage abroad. I researched shipping companies for sending belongings overseas and started making lists of what to take, what to donate, and what to store. The process was both exhilarating and sobering. Sorting through a lifetime of possessions, deciding what was essential enough to transport across an ocean, forced me to confront how much of my life had been lived for other people. Boxes of Sarah's childhood artwork, Robert's business awards, Family photos from gatherings where I had cooked and organized and cleaned up while everyone else made memories. But I also found treasures I had forgotten about. My college French textbooks, travel journals from a European trip Robert and I had taken for our 25th anniversary, paintings I had started but never finished because someone else always needed my time and attention. On Thursday, Sarah called again. This time, her tone was different, more tentative, almost pleading. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I feel like I'm not handling this well." "What do you mean?" "I mean that every time we talk, I seem to say the wrong thing. I'm trying to be more attentive, but I feel like I'm being tested, like you're waiting for me to mess up so you can justify leaving." I set down the box of books I was sorting and focused on the conversation. "Sarah, I'm not testing you. I'm observing whether your behavior matches your stated intentions. But it feels like no matter what I do, it's not enough. What you've been doing isn't enough, that's true. But Sarah, you've had months to notice that our relationship was deteriorating, and you didn't address it until I threatened to move away. That suggests that your motivation is fear of loss, not genuine desire to be close to me. Can it be both?" It can be, but fear-based changes don't usually last. Once the immediate threat passes, people tend to revert to their comfortable patterns. "So you don't think I can really change?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I think you can change if you want to badly enough. But I also think you're more comfortable with me being the low-maintenance family member who accommodates your schedule and priorities." "That's not true. Sarah, yesterday you ended our conversation to tend to Bruno's anxiety about raised voices. You prioritized a dog's emotional comfort over resolving a conflict with your mother. But Bruno gets really upset when, and there you go again. You're more concerned about Bruno's feelings than about understanding why your choice was hurtful to me." The silence stretched between us. "Mom, what do you want from me?" "I want you to choose me first sometimes. I want to feel like I matter enough in your life that you'd reschedule Bruno's walk to finish an important conversation with me. I want you to ask about my life because you're genuinely interested, not because you're trying to prove you're a good daughter." "How can I prove that?" "I'm genuinely interested?" "You can't prove it, Sarah. It either is or it isn't. And if you have to work this hard to fake interest in your mother's life, maybe that tells us something important about your actual feelings. That's not fair. What's not fair is expecting me to be grateful for scraps of attention from my own daughter." Another long pause. "Mom, are you really going to move to France?" "Yes." "Because of me?" "Because of me. Because I'm 70 years old, and I want to spend whatever time I have left feeling valued and prioritized, not waiting for people to have time for me between their other obligations." "But what if I really do change? What if I make you a priority?" "Sarah, you shouldn't have to make me a priority. I should already be one. The fact that you're talking about it like it's a conscious effort you'll have to maintain tells me everything I need to know." That weekend was Thanksgiving, and true to her promise, Sarah invited me to dinner. But the invitation came with conditions that revealed how little had actually changed in her thinking. "Mom, I'm so excited you're coming for Thanksgiving," she said when she called Tuesday evening. "I've been planning the menu, and I want to make all your favorites." "That sounds wonderful, Sarah. There's just one thing. Bruno has been doing so well lately, and the vet thinks part of it is because we've maintained very consistent routines. So I was hoping we could keep things low-key. Maybe not stay up too late, not have too many dishes clattering in the kitchen. That kind of thing." I felt my heart sink. Even her invitation to Thanksgiving came with instructions on how to behave to accommodate Bruno's needs. "Sarah, what you're describing isn't Thanksgiving dinner. It's a quiet meal constrained by your dog's anxiety levels. It's still Thanksgiving. We'll have turkey and stuffing and pie. And I'll have to modulate my voice, minimize noise in the kitchen, and leave early so Bruno doesn't get overstimulated." "Mom, you're making it sound worse than it is." "Am I?" "Sarah, listen to yourself. You're asking me to celebrate Thanksgiving while tiptoeing around your dog's emotional state. I just want everyone to be comfortable. Including me? Of course, including you. Then drop the restrictions. Cook a normal Thanksgiving dinner where we can laugh and chat and make noise in the kitchen like we used to. Let Bruno adjust to a little extra activity for one day. But his progress, Sarah, stop. Do you hear yourself? You're more worried about a temporary setback in your dog's training than about having a normal, joyful holiday with your mother. The conversation ended with Sarah saying she needed to think about it, and me wondering why I was surprised that even her attempt at inclusion came with conditions designed around Bruno's needs. That night, I called Linda and confirmed my December 1st departure date. "Ruth, you sound certain," she said. "No last-minute doubts?" "No doubts. I'm ready to start a new chapter. I'm excited for you." "And Ruth?" "I think you're making exactly the right choice." The next morning, Sarah called back. "Mom, about Thanksgiving. You're right. We'll have a normal dinner, music, conversation, whatever noise we make in the kitchen. Bruno will just have to cope." It was a victory, but it felt hollow. The fact that Sarah had to make a conscious decision to prioritize a normal Thanksgiving dinner over her dog's anxiety management plan showed me that Bruno was still her default priority. "Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. Mom, I want this to be a good day for us. I want that too." But as I hung up the phone, I realized that wanting wasn't going to be enough. Sarah was trying, I could see that, but her efforts felt forced, conscious, effortful. She was working hard to pay attention to me in ways that should have been natural and automatic. It reminded me of Robert in the early stages of his dementia, when he had to consciously work to remember things that had once been second nature. The effort was touching, but it also highlighted how far we had drifted from where we should have been. That evening, I did something I had been putting off. I wrote the letter I had drafted weeks earlier, but this time I planned to send it. "Dear Sarah, by the time you read this letter, I will be living in France. I have decided that if I am going to be alone, I might as well be alone somewhere beautiful. Somewhere I can build a life based on my own interests and desires rather than accommodating other people's schedules and priorities. You have tried to change our dynamic since I threatened to leave, and I appreciate the effort. But effort is exactly what it has been. Conscious, deliberate work to pay attention to me in ways that should be natural between a mother and daughter. The fact that you have to work so hard to show genuine interest in my life, to prioritize our relationship, to include me in family celebrations without conditions, tells me that these behaviors don't come naturally to you. I am not asking you to change who you are, Sarah. But I am also not willing to accept a relationship where my own daughter has to work overtime to treat me with basic consideration. I love you, but I have spent enough of my life waiting for love that comes without conditions, attention that doesn't have to compete with other priorities, and inclusion that doesn't require me to modify my behavior to accommodate everyone else's needs. France, I will build a life where I am chosen first, not settled for when more interesting options aren't available. I hope someday you understand that real love isn't about making someone a priority when you're threatened with losing them. It's about them already being a priority because their presence in your life is a gift you don't take for granted. I will always love you, but I will not continue to accept being loved as an afterthought. Your mother, Ruth P.S. I have left detailed instructions with my attorney about my affairs. My contact information in France will be available through Margaret should any emergencies arise. I sealed the letter and placed it on my kitchen counter, ready to mail after Thanksgiving. Whether the holiday went well or poorly, my decision was made. I was going to France and I was going to build a life where being 70 and independent made me more valuable, not less worthy of attention. Sarah could keep her dog. I was choosing myself. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to come first in someone's priorities, even if that someone had to be me. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the kind of crisp November weather that makes everything feel like a greeting card, and for a moment, driving to Sarah's house with homemade cranberry sauce and my grandmother's dinner rolls in the passenger seat, I allowed myself to hope that maybe this could be a turning point. Maybe Sarah really had learned something from our conversations. Maybe I was being too cynical about her ability to change. That optimism lasted exactly 12 minutes after I walked through her front door. "Mom, welcome." Sarah greeted me with an enthusiastic hug that felt slightly performative, like she was demonstrating good daughter behavior for an invisible audience. "I'm so glad you're here." Bruno appeared immediately, tail wagging tentatively. He'd grown, more comfortable with my presence during my visit the previous week, and I was genuinely pleased to see him approaching me without the wariness he'd shown before. "Hello, Bruno," I said, reaching down to pet him. "You're looking very handsome today." "Oh, Mom, I have to tell you the most amazing thing," Sarah said, immediately launching into what I was beginning to recognize as her default conversation mode. Bruno had such a breakthrough yesterday. The neighbor's dog got loose and ran into our yard, and instead of hiding, Bruno actually went to the fence to investigate. The trainer says it's a huge sign of increased confidence. "That's wonderful," I said, following her into the kitchen where the familiar smells of roasting turkey and sage stuffing should have felt like coming home. Instead, I noticed immediately how different everything felt from our previous Thanksgiving celebrations. The kitchen, usually a warm chaos of multiple dishes in various stages of preparation, looked almost sterile in its organization. Every pot had its designated place, every ingredient was measured and contained. It looked like cooking for someone who couldn't handle unexpected sounds or movements. "Sarah, where's your music?" I asked. For years, our Thanksgiving cooking had been accompanied by jazz standards or classic rock, with us singing along badly and laughing at our own off-key harmonies. "Oh, I thought we'd keep things quieter this year. Bruno gets anxious with too much auditory stimulation." There it was, not even 30 minutes into our holiday, and Bruno's comfort level was already determining our experience. "But this is Thanksgiving, sweetheart. Music is part of the tradition." "I know, but traditions can evolve, right? We're adapting to our new family dynamic. New family dynamic. As if Bruno was a human family member whose needs carried equal weight with those of actual humans. "Sarah, yesterday you promised we'd have a normal Thanksgiving dinner. This is normal, just quieter normal." I watched my daughter as she moved around her kitchen with the careful precision of someone managing a delicate situation rather than celebrating a holiday. Every action seemed calculated to minimize disruption, every sound carefully modulated. "Where's Mark?" I asked. "He's in the living room with Bruno, keeping him calm while we cook." The combination of food smells and kitchen sounds can be overwhelming for him. So Mark, who usually helped with cooking and enjoyed our kitchen conversations, had been relegated to dog-sitting duty to keep Bruno comfortable while Sarah and I prepared dinner under sound restrictions. "Sarah, this isn't what you promised." "What do you mean? We're cooking together, we're talking, we're whispering and tiptoeing around your kitchen like we're in a library. This isn't Thanksgiving dinner preparation, it's anxiety management. For your dog." "Mom, please, can we just try to have a nice day?" But I was beginning to realize that Sarah's definition of a nice day meant a day where Bruno's needs were prioritized and everyone else adapted to accommodate his limitations. The breaking point came 2 hours later, when we were preparing to serve dinner. I was mashing potatoes, a task I'd performed at every Thanksgiving for the past 40 years, when I inadvertently dropped the masher into the pot with a small splash and clatter. The sound was barely noticeable by normal standards, but Sarah immediately rushed over with a look of panic. "Mom, be careful. Bruno's right in the next room." "Sarah, it was a potato masher. I dropped a potato masher." "I know, but sudden noises?" She was interrupted by Bruno himself, who had wandered into the kitchen, apparently untroubled by the great potato masher crisis of Thanksgiving 2023. He sniffed around hopefully for dropped food, tail wagging gently, showing no signs of distress whatsoever. "He seems fine," I observed. This time. But we can't risk it. That's when I realized what was really happening. This wasn't about Bruno's actual anxiety levels. It was about Sarah's anxiety about Bruno's potential anxiety. She had become so hypervigilant about his emotional state that she was restricting everyone else's behavior, based on problems that might occur, not problems that were actually occurring. Sarah, look at him. He's not anxious. He's not hiding. He's hoping for table scraps like any normal dog. But the trainer said, "The trainer isn't here, Sarah. Bruno is here and he's fine. You're the one who's anxious." "I'm not anxious. I'm being responsible. You're being controlling. There's a difference." Mark appeared in the kitchen doorway at that moment, looking uncomfortable with the tension he'd obviously overheard. "Everything okay in here?" he asked. "Everything's fine," Sarah said quickly. "Mom just made a little noise with the potatoes." The way she said it, as if I'd committed some kind of transgression that needed to be explained and managed, crystallized everything that was wrong with our dynamic. "I made a normal cooking sound while cooking," I corrected. "The same sounds I've been making in this kitchen for 5 years without incident." "Mom, why are you being so difficult about this?" "Difficult?" I set down the potato masher and looked at my daughter. "Sarah, I'm being treated like a disruptive presence in your home because I made a normal noise while helping prepare a meal I was invited to cook. That's not what's happening." "Then what is happening?" Mark cleared his throat. "Maybe I should take Bruno for a walk while you two work this out." "That's a good idea," Sarah said immediately. "Give us some space to finish cooking." After Mark and Bruno left, I expected Sarah to relax, to acknowledge that we could now have the normal Thanksgiving preparation we'd both been pretending was possible. Instead, she continued operating in the same careful, restricted mode. "Sarah, they're gone. We can cook normally now. I don't want to get in the habit of being loud when Bruno's around." "Loud?" "Sarah, I wasn't being loud. I was cooking. In a kitchen. The way people have cooked in kitchens for centuries. You don't understand how sensitive he is." "I understand that you've decided his theoretical sensitivity is more important than normal human behavior." "He's not theoretical, Mom. He's real, and he's been through trauma. And I'm real too, Sarah. I'm your mother, and I've been through my own challenges. Losing your father, rebuilding my life, dealing with loneliness and aging, and the gradual loss of independence that comes with getting older. But somehow my emotional needs are negotiable while Bruno's are sacred." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and I hoped maybe I'd gotten through to her. But when she spoke, her voice had taken on the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious to a slow child. "Mom, the difference is that you can understand when we need to make accommodations. Bruno can't. So my understanding means I deserve less consideration? It means you're capable of being flexible. And you interpret my capability as an obligation to always be the one who accommodates everyone else's needs." We finished cooking, in relative silence after that, but the tension in the kitchen was thick enough to cut with a carving knife. When Mark and Bruno returned, Sarah immediately brightened, fussing over Bruno and asking Mark detailed questions about their walk as if they'd been gone for hours instead of 30 minutes. Dinner itself was a masterclass in awkward family dynamics. Sarah divided her attention between making conversation with me and monitoring Bruno, who was lying peacefully in the corner showing no signs of distress. Every time I laughed a little too loudly at one of Mark's jokes or clinked my fork against my plate while cutting turkey, Sarah would glance nervously toward Bruno, creating an atmosphere where everyone was walking on eggshells. "This stuffing is delicious, Mrs. Fletcher," Mark said, clearly trying to maintain some normalcy. "Did you change the recipe this year?" "It's the same recipe I've used for 20 years, I said. Though I was a little worried the sage might be too aromatic for Bruno. Sarah missed the sarcasm entirely. "Oh, the trainer said most herbs are fine as long as we don't use too much." "Sarah," Mark said gently, "I think your mom was joking." Oh, Sarah looked confused, as if the idea of making light of Bruno's needs was incomprehensible. The final straw came during dessert. I had brought my grandmother's pumpkin pie, a recipe that had been in our family for 4 generations and was traditionally served with great ceremony and storytelling about great-grandmother Rose's legendary Thanksgiving spreads. As I was cutting the pie and beginning to tell the familiar story about Rose's farmhouse kitchen, Sarah interrupted me. "Mom, could you speak a little softer? Bruno's had a lot of stimulation today, and we want to keep his stress levels manageable." I set down the pie server and stared at my daughter. "Sarah, you want me to whisper the story about great-grandmother Rose because it might stress out your dog?" "Not whisper, just tone it down a little." "The story about my grandmother, your great-grandmother, the woman who taught me to make this pie that I've been serving at this table for years, needs to be told in hushed tones so we don't overstimulate." "Bruno? Mom, you're making this sound ridiculous." "It is ridiculous, Sarah. It's absolutely ridiculous that I'm being asked to minimize a family tradition because your dog might find normal conversation volume stressful." "He's not just a dog, he's a dog, Sarah. He's a dog you've allowed to take over your entire life, your relationship with your husband, and now your relationship with me. He's a dog who's getting better mental health care than most humans, who has his own therapist, whose emotional needs dictate how your family functions." "Mom, calm down." "I will not calm down. I've been calm for months while watching you choose this animal over me at every turn. I've been understanding while you canceled visits, patient while you stopped calling, accommodating while you turned family gatherings into anxiety management sessions. I'm done being calm." Bruno, responding to the raised voices, got up and moved to his bed in the corner. He didn't appear traumatized or panicked, just sensibly removing himself from a human argument that had nothing to do with him. "Look what you've done," Sarah said, immediately going to comfort Bruno. "He's upset now." Sarah, look at him. He's not cowering under the bed. He's not shaking. He moved to his bed because loud voices make him uncomfortable, which is normal. Dog behavior. You're the one who's treating this like an emergency. But Sarah was already on the floor next to Bruno's bed, speaking to him in the soft, soothing voice she used to use with me when I was sick or sad. "It's okay, baby. Grandma didn't mean to be so loud. Everything's okay now." Grandma? She had never called me grandma in relation to Bruno before, but hearing it in this context, as if I were the problematic family member who needed to be explained and managed for the dog's benefit, was the final insult. "That's it," I said, standing up from the table. "I'm leaving." "Mom, don't overreact. Just give Bruno a few minutes to settle down and we can finish dessert." "Sarah, listen to yourself. You're asking me to wait for your dog to recover from hearing normal conversation volume before we can continue our Thanksgiving dinner." Mark, who had been sitting in uncomfortable silence through this entire exchange, finally spoke up. "Sarah, maybe your mom has a point. Bruno seems fine, and this is supposed to be a family dinner." Sarah turned on him with surprising sharpness. "Don't you dare take her side. You know how far Bruno's come, how much work we've put into his recovery." "I'm not taking sides," Mark said carefully. "I'm just saying that maybe we could have a normal dinner conversation without constantly monitoring Bruno's stress levels." "Normal for who? This is normal for our family now." "What family?" I asked. "Sarah, look around this table. Mark is afraid to speak up. I'm being shushed for telling family stories. And you're more concerned about a dog's emotional state than about having an actual conversation with your mother. This isn't a family dinner. This is a hostage situation where we're all being held captive by your obsession with Bruno's feelings. It's not an obsession, it's responsibility. It's an obsession, Sarah. And it's killing every relationship you have with actual humans." I began gathering my things, and Sarah finally looked up from where she was still comforting Bruno. "Mom, where are you going?" "Home, to pack for France." "You're really going to leave because of one argument?" "I'm leaving because this wasn't one argument, Sarah. This was the final demonstration that no matter what promises you make, no matter how hard you try to change, Bruno will always come first in your life. You can't help it. You've trained yourself to see his needs as more urgent and important than anyone else's. That's not true. Sarah, you called me grandma in reference to your dog. You referred to him as your baby and me as the disruptive family member who upset him. You spent our entire Thanksgiving dinner monitoring his stress levels instead of enjoying time with your actual family. But he's a dog, Sarah. A dog you love, a dog you've helped, a dog who's become the center of your universe in ways that have pushed out every human relationship you have. Mark was nodding silently, and I could see in his expression that this conversation was long overdue in their household too. Mom, please don't leave angry. I'm not leaving angry, Sarah. I'm leaving sad. I'm sad that my daughter has chosen a life where she can't enjoy a holiday meal without anxiety about whether normal conversation might upset her dog. I'm sad that you've convinced yourself this is healthy and normal and sustainable. It is normal for us. Then you've built a very small, very restricted world for yourselves, and you've made it clear that there's no room in that world for me, unless I'm willing to live according to Bruno's limitations. I walked toward the door, and Sarah followed me. Mom, what about us? What about our relationship? What relationship, Sarah? For months, our interactions have been you giving me updates about Bruno, interrupted by you having to tend to Bruno's needs. That's not a relationship with your mother. That's a periodic status report to someone you happen to be related to. But I've been trying to change that. You've been trying to manage me better, the same way you manage Bruno. But Sarah, I'm not a problem to be managed. I'm your mother, and I deserve to be prioritized in your life, not just accommodated when it's convenient. As I reached the door, Sarah made one last desperate attempt. Mom, what if we put Bruno in his crate during dinners? What if we scheduled specific times when it's just us? And there it was, the offer to schedule time with me around Bruno's needs, as if I were another appointment in their dog care routine. Sarah, do you hear yourself? You're offering to crate your dog so you can spend time with your mother. The fact that you think that's a reasonable solution tells me everything I need to know about how you see our relationship. I'm trying to find a compromise. The compromise would be Bruno learning to coexist with normal family life, not the family restricting their behavior to accommodate Bruno's anxiety. But you can't see the difference because somewhere along the way, you decided that his comfort was more important than anyone else's. I opened the door and turned back for one last look at the daughter I'd raised, the woman who had once called me her best friend, the person I'd loved more than anyone else in the world. Sarah, I hope someday you realize that real families don't require their members to minimize themselves to keep the peace. Real families make room for everyone to be fully present and fully human. Mom, please, take care of Bruno, Sarah. He's clearly the family member who matters most to you. I left her standing in the doorway, and I didn't look back. That night, I mailed the letter I'd written. The next morning, I called Linda and confirmed my departure date. In 1 week, I would be on a plane to France, leaving behind a daughter who had chosen to build her life around a dog's emotional needs rather than maintaining human relationships. For the first time since making this decision, I felt no doubt, no regret, and no sadness. I felt free. The week between Thanksgiving and my departure passed in a blur of final preparations and unexpected peace. I had expected to feel anxious, doubtful, or at least nostalgic about leaving everything I'd known for 7 decades. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine excitement about my future. Sarah called 12 times in those 7 days. I answered none of them. She left voicemails that progressed through the entire spectrum of emotions: confusion, hurt, anger, bargaining, and finally, what sounded like genuine panic as she realized I was actually serious about leaving. Mom, please, call me back. I know you're upset about Thanksgiving, but we can work this out. I've been thinking about what you said, and maybe you're right about some things. Please don't leave the country over one bad holiday. Mom, it's me again. Mark thinks I should give you space, but I can't just let you move to France without talking this through. I love you, and I know we can fix this if we both try harder. Mom, I went to your apartment today and Mrs. Patterson said you've been giving away your furniture. Are you really planning to leave permanently? This is insane. You can't just run away to another continent because we had a fight. Mom, please, I'm scared. I know I haven't been the best daughter lately, but leaving forever seems extreme. What about holidays? What about emergencies? What if something happens to you in France and I can't help? That last voicemail almost broke my resolve. The fear in Sarah's voice was real, and her concern about emergencies touched the part of me that had spent 42 years being her mother, wanting to comfort her and make everything okay. But then I remembered her calling me grandma in relation to Bruno, remembered being shushed for telling family stories, remembered being offered scheduled visits around her dog's crate time. Deleted all the voicemails without responding. Margaret called on Tuesday. Ruth, Sarah's been calling me. She's really panicked about you leaving. I'm sure she is. She says you won't return her calls. That's correct. Ruth, don't you think you should at least talk to her before you leave? Give her one more chance. To make this right? I was quiet for a moment, considering my sister's words. Margaret, what would you say to someone who kept making the same promise over and over while continuing the exact behavior they'd promised to change? I'd say actions speak louder than words. Exactly. Sarah has shown me through her actions what I mean to her. I believe that more than I believe her panicked phone calls now that she's facing consequences. But Ruth, she's your daughter. She's my daughter who chose a dog over me. Repeatedly. Consistently. For months. Being related to someone doesn't obligate me to accept whatever treatment they're willing to give me. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. You know what? You're right. You've given Sarah every opportunity to prioritize your relationship, and she's chosen not to. Sometimes people need to lose something before they understand its value. And sometimes they still don't understand its value even after they lose it. Are you prepared for that possibility? I'm prepared for Sarah to continue prioritizing Bruno over every human relationship in her life, including mine. I'm prepared for her to eventually replace Mark too, if he ever starts requiring more emotional energy than she wants to give. I'm prepared for her to build a smaller and smaller world until it's just her and her dog, and for her to call that love. And you're okay with that? I'm not okay with watching it happen. That's why I'm leaving. On Wednesday, I received a text from Mark. Mrs. Fletcher, I know you probably don't want to hear from our family right now, but I wanted you to know that Sarah has been crying for 3 days straight. She really does love you. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Mark, Sarah loves me the way someone loves a piece of furniture. She's upset about losing me because my absence will be inconvenient, not because she values my presence. There's a difference. He didn't respond, which told me everything I needed to know about whether he understood that difference. Thursday morning, Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door with a casserole and tears in her eyes. Ruth, dear, I can't believe you're really leaving. This neighborhood won't be the same without you. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That means a lot to me. Sarah stopped by again yesterday. She looked terrible. Red eyes, no makeup, like she hadn't slept in days. I'm sorry she's upset. Are you? Because, honey, you seem awfully calm for someone whose daughter is falling apart. I invited Mrs. Patterson in for coffee, and we sat at my kitchen table surrounded by boxes and suitcases. Mrs. Patterson, can I ask you something honestly? Of course. In all the conversations you've had with me over the past year, how often have I mentioned feeling frustrated or hurt by Sarah's behavior? She thought about it. Often, I suppose. You've mentioned feeling left out, feeling like that dog was taking over their lives. And in all that time, Did you ever see Sarah make a genuine effort to include me in her life, or just token gestures when she felt guilty? Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Token gestures, mostly. She'd invite you over when Mark was out of town, or call when something was wrong with the dog and she needed someone to talk to. So you understand why I'm leaving? I understand. Why you're hurt. I don't understand why you're moving to another continent instead of fighting for your relationship with your daughter. Mrs. Patterson, I'm 70 years old. I spent 30 years fighting for my relationship with Robert, accommodating his dreams and cleaning up his messes and making excuses for his failures. I spent 22 years fighting for my relationship with Sarah, supporting her through school and career struggles and fertility treatments. I've spent enough of my life fighting for relationships with people who take my effort for granted. But she's your only child, and I'm her only mother. If that mattered to her, she wouldn't have let our relationship deteriorate to this point. Mrs. Patterson reached across the table and patted my hand. You know what, Ruth? I think you're the bravest woman I know. At 70, you're choosing yourself first. Most of us never learn to do that. Friday evening, as I was finishing my packing, Sarah appeared at my door. I could see through the peephole that she looked exactly as Mark had described. Exhausted, tear-stained, desperate. I almost didn't answer. But something about her posture, the way she was leaning against my doorframe as if she could barely hold herself up, made me open the door. Mom, thank God. I was afraid you'd already left. My flight is tomorrow morning. Mom, please, can we talk? Just for a few minutes? Against my better judgment, I let her in. She looked around at my empty apartment, at the suitcases by the door, at the life I'd dismantled in preparation for starting over. You're really doing this? Yes. Mom, I've been thinking about everything you said, and I realize I've made mistakes. Big mistakes. I want to fix this. Sarah, we've had this conversation before. Multiple times. But this time I really understand. I see how I've been prioritizing Bruno over our relationship. Do you? Because 3 days ago, you called me Grandma, in relation to your dog while asking me to wait for him to recover from normal conversation volume. I know. I was wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of things. What specifically have you been wrong about? I've been treating you like you don't matter as much as Bruno. Why? She was quiet for a moment. Because Bruno needs me more? Sarah, even now, you're framing this as if need determines worth. Bruno doesn't need you more than I do. He needs you differently. But you've decided that his type of need is more important than mine. What type of need do you have, Mom? You're so independent, so capable. I need to feel valued by my daughter. I need to feel like my presence in your life is a gift, not an obligation. I need conversations where you're genuinely interested in my thoughts and experiences, not just checking to make sure I'm okay so you can focus on more pressing matters. But I am interested. Sarah, when I told you I was teaching computer classes to elderly people, your response was to immediately tell me about Bruno's training progress. When I mentioned reading French novels, you asked one polite question, and then spent 20 minutes describing Bruno's socialization therapy. You're not interested in my life. You're performing interest long enough to transition back to your real priority. Sarah began crying, the kind of deep, hopeless sobs that come from finally understanding something you don't want to accept. Mom, I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it, Sarah. That's what I've realized. This isn't a problem that can be solved with better communication or more effort. This is about your fundamental priorities, and Bruno is your priority. Not because you're a bad person, but because that's who you've become. I can change. Sarah, you've been trying to change for weeks, and even your attempts at change have been centered around managing me better, rather than actually shifting your priorities. You offered to crate Bruno during dinners as if I were another pet whose needs had to be scheduled around his. I was trying to compromise. You were trying to find ways to accommodate both me and Bruno without actually choosing me over him. But Sarah, real relationships require real choices. Sometimes you have to disappoint one person or creature to prioritize another. And you've consistently chosen to disappoint me rather than inconvenience Bruno. Because Bruno can't understand? And there you go again. Even now, in the middle of a conversation about losing your mother forever, you're defending your decision to prioritize Bruno's needs. Sarah stopped mid-sentence, finally hearing herself. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I just did it again." "You did? Mom, I don't know how to stop." "I don't think you can stop, Sarah. I think you've rewired yourself to see Bruno's needs as more urgent and legitimate than anyone else's. And I don't think you can undo that even if you want to. So you're giving up on me." "I'm giving up on waiting for you to choose me. There's a difference." Sarah looked around my empty apartment again, and I could see her trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. "Where will you live in? France? Paris? I have an apartment in the 7th arrondissement. That sounds expensive. I'm using the money I've been saving for emergencies. It turns out that at 70, the biggest emergency is wasting whatever time you have left waiting for other people to value you. What if you get sick? What if you need help?" "Sarah, I've been handling my own medical care, emergencies, and daily life for 5 years since your father died. The only difference will be that I'll be doing it in a place where I'm building a life I actually want instead of waiting for scraps of attention from people who see me as a convenience. But what about family? What about me? What about you, Sarah? For the past year, you've made it clear that family means you give updates about your dog while I listen politely and don't make too much noise or require too much attention. That's not family. That's an audience. Mom, please don't leave me." The desperation in her voice was real, and for a moment, I felt the old maternal instinct to comfort her, to fix her pain, to sacrifice my own needs to make her feel better. But then I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized something profound. Sarah wasn't crying because she was losing me. She was crying because she was losing the idea of me, the safety net of having a mother who would always be available when more interesting options weren't around. "Sarah, you're not losing me. You lost me months ago when you decided Bruno's theoretical anxiety was more important than my actual feelings. You lost me when you stopped asking about my life and started treating our conversations like maintenance calls. You lost me when you turned family gatherings into anxiety management sessions for your dog. But I want to find you again. I don't think you do, sweetie. I think you want to keep me available without having to prioritize me. You want me to be the low-maintenance family member who's grateful for whatever attention you're willing to spare. That's not true. Sarah, if I stayed, and Bruno developed a serious health problem next month that required constant care, would you still have time and energy for rebuilding our relationship?" She was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," she finally admitted, "and that's exactly why I'm leaving. Because your commitment to our relationship is conditional on nothing more pressing coming up, and in your life, almost everything is more pressing than your relationship with me." Sarah cried for a few more minutes, while I watched, feeling sad but not wavering in my decision. "Will you call me from France?" she asked finally. "I don't know. Will you give me your address? Margaret will have it if there are emergencies. Mom, I love you. I love you too, Sarah. But I won't continue to accept being loved as an afterthought." After she left, I finished my packing and went to bed early. My flight to Paris was at 10 a.m., and I wanted to be well rested for the beginning of my new life. 6 months later, I'm writing this from a cafe in Montmartre, watching the sun set over Paris, while sipping wine that costs less than a coffee at Chicago's airport. My French has improved dramatically. I've made friends with the regulars at my neighborhood market, and I'm taking watercolor classes with a group of international women who've all chosen adventure over settling for less than they deserve. My phone which still has my American number, rings occasionally with calls from Sarah. I answer sometimes when I feel like it, when I'm in the mood for a brief update on Bruno's progress or Sarah's work projects. The conversations are pleasant, but superficial, exactly what they always were. But now I don't pretend they're more than that. Sarah sent me photos of Bruno graduating from his advanced training program. He looks happy and confident, and I can see that Sarah's investment in his well-being has paid off. She's helped a traumatized animal heal and thrive, which is genuinely admirable, but she's also created a life so small and restricted that she can't imagine spending a holiday dinner without monitoring her dog's stress levels. She's chosen a relationship that requires no growth, no challenge, no complexity, and she's convinced herself that this represents the pinnacle of love and devotion. I don't argue with her anymore. I don't try to point out the limitations of her choices or the costs of her priorities. I listen to her updates about Bruno's latest achievements and share superficial details about my life in Paris. Last week, she asked if I missed her. I miss the daughter I thought I had, I told her honestly. The one who used to be interested in the world beyond her immediate concerns, who used to enjoy conversations that weren't about crisis management, who used to understand that relationships require actual attention, not just periodic check-ins. I'm still that person, she said. Maybe, but that person is buried under so many layers of anxiety about Bruno's well-being that I can't find her anymore. Do you think you'll ever come back to visit? I don't know. Maybe. If I do, it will be because I want to see Chicago, not because I'm hoping our relationship will be different than it is. What does that mean? It means I've accepted who you are now, Sarah. You're someone who's more comfortable loving a creature that can't challenge you than maintaining complex relationships with humans. You're someone who finds purpose in being needed desperately, rather than being chosen freely. That's not wrong, but it's not what I want from my remaining years. And what do you want? I looked around the cafe where I was sitting, at the elderly French couple sharing a bottle of wine and arguing passionately about politics, at the young mother reading a book while her toddler played quietly with crayons, at the group of friends, my age planning a trip to Italy and laughing at their own terrible pronunciation of Italian words. I want to be fully present in my own life, I said. I want relationships where I'm valued for who I am, not managed because of who I might become. I want conversations that feed my soul instead of draining my energy. I want to feel like the world is full of possibilities instead of restrictions. And you have that in Paris? I have that in myself, Sarah. Paris is just the place where I finally decided to claim it. After we hung up, I ordered another glass of wine and pulled out my journal. I've been writing my story, not just the story of moving to France, but the story of a woman who spent 70 years learning to accommodate everyone else's needs before finally discovering what it felt like to put herself first. It's a good story. Not because it has a happy ending where the daughter realizes her mistakes and the family reunites, but because it has an honest ending where a woman chooses self-respect over settling for scraps. Tomorrow, I'm meeting Marie from my French class to visit a small art gallery in the Marais. Next week, I'm taking a cooking class focused on regional French cuisines. Next month, I'm traveling to Provence with a group from my conversation club. I'm building a life where I'm the main character in my own story, not a supporting character in someone else's drama. Sarah can keep Bruno. She can keep monitoring his stress levels and celebrating his small victories and building her identity around being needed by a creature that can't imagine a life without her. I'll be here in Paris, learning to paint landscapes and speaking French with a terrible American accent and making friends with people who choose to spend time with me because they enjoy my company, not because they feel obligated to check on my well-being. For the first time in my adult life, I'm exactly where I want to be, with exactly the people who appreciate my presence. It turns out that at 70, the world is still full of possibilities, when you're brave enough to choose yourself first. Salut, Bruno. I hope you're happy with your choice. I know I am with mine. Ruth Fletcher lives in Paris with her growing collection of watercolor paintings and her newfound understanding that being alone is not the same as being lonely. She has not regretted her decision for a single day. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us!